Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Esri GeoDev webinar series. About 2 years ago, we started this series as a way to continue engaging in developer-related topics and discussions in between dev summits. Speaking of which, we have our next developer summit coming up in Berlin, November 6th through 8th. We have a lot of new topics, advanced features, and additional functionality to share with you over the next coming months, so be sure to stay connected with us through our GeoDev webinar series page on go.esri.com/geodev or any of our social media accounts at Esri GeoDev. We would love to have conversations like these taking place throughout the year so that when we do meet at one of these Developer Summit conferences, it will be as though we never stopped. We hope you get as much or more out of this webinar than you anticipated. Now we would like to introduce you to today's webinar, Improving Your Web App Through UI UX Best Practices. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select Use Telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will definitely have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Michael Geig, Lead UI Engineer, and Alan Laffrenbois, Software Engineer at Esri. Michael, let's get started, shall we?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you today. Thanks, Amy. My name is Michael Geig, and I've been with Esri for 16 years now. I'm leading the UI UX Tech Center in our professional services division. And, on average, we work on approximately 50 projects and products each year. And my job is to create compelling and useful apps. I'm co-presenting with Al today. Al, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. Al from Pause. I work on the developer experience team. We build the ArcGIS for Developer website and the SDK experience, some of the tools, tutorials, and all those good things. So yeah, that's me, and welcome everyone.
Yeah, that's great. And, I shall actually mention that Al and I, we've been talking about this subject for a couple of years now, and you can find us, every year at Dev Summit. So if you want to chat with us, feel free to see us next year in Palm Springs. So my goal for this webinar is to change the way you think about application development and design. I want to inspire you to incorporate user experience or UX into all aspects of your already existing processes. So throughout the webinar, you will hear me talking a lot about basic principles and best practices, and I will do my best to illustrate them through examples taken from my own experiences. In the second half of the webinar, I will give you a behind-the-scenes look of what I believe is one of the coolest products at Esri. So stay tuned for that. A brief note at this point, I will not talk about how to customize Esri products like Enterprise or Hub sites or how to design widgets for Web Builder. This is well documented at developers.arcgis.com. So with that, let's get started. First off, what is UX design? And actually, let's do a little quiz. Here's question number one. And that's actually a question that I get all the time. What's the difference between UI and UX? Or is there any? So UX equals UI. What do you think, true or false? Let's describe UX by using a metaphor. This is a pasta salad. Let's call this the product. When you think about it, it's just a collection of parts, the noodles, tomatoes, corn, basil, all the other ingredients. All of these parts are necessary for the product to work. The job of a UX designer is to look at the bigger picture and ask questions to understand the person's needs, motivations, and behaviors. Like, why are you eating pasta? What do you do while eating pasta? Or since this particular pasta seems to be made for smaller children, what can we do to avoid injury and minimize cleaning up for daddy? So now the UI is the interface that interacts with the product. In terms of pasta for kids, it's a plastic spork that serves as the bridge between the user and the product. So our understanding of the experience, which is the research into the product, has a direct impact on the appearance of the interface, or in other words, UX informs the UI. Okay, question number 2. UX is about solving a problem. What do you think, true or false? Let's assume for a moment that you are a UX designer at a company that produces electronic wheelchairs. Management wants to increase sales and came up with some redesign ideas for the next generation wheelchair, like a stronger battery or maybe additional cup holders. They think those are great ideas, and they come to you as a designer with the ask to accommodate the new requirements and, not surprisingly, to make it look good. I mean, I've been in this situation many times, and I find it really hard to question those requirements. But here's the deal. It's really important to understand that these requests are mostly attempts to address the business needs. And it's actually your job to research the end user needs and come up with a new product design. So if you, as the designer, had been involved from the beginning, you would have interviewed people that rely on your product. You would have tried to understand the current needs and pain points. You would have empathized with them. And eventually, you probably would have found out that the number one problem is that, quote, people are always looking down at me, or, quote, it is difficult to speak eye to eye. As you can see, this is a completely different problem to solve now. This is a finding that may very well separate your product from others and give your company a competitive edge. So designing a successful product is not about adding more features or simply solving a problem, but it is to solve the right problem. I sometimes say that it's easy to solve a problem that everybody sees, but it's difficult to solve a problem that nobody sees. Okay, question number 3. You are the user. True or false? This is a web page that most of you know. It's Craigslist. It's a very popular platform for selling services and second-hand goods. So what do you think? Is this an example of a good design? I mean, it's one of the most successful sites on the web, ever. Yet, it's touted widely for its ugliness. First reactions typically include attributes like boring, outdated, busy, crowded. As a matter of fact, a quick Google search returned dozens of attempts to improve the interface by suggesting really beautiful redesigns. And just looking at those screenshots, I mean, they truly look good. Well, before we answer the question about Craigslist, let's take a look at these pictures. What do they have in common? I mean, besides that they're all black and white. All 3 pictures show people in a very special environment and situation. We call it the context. They are all working on a task, and to be successful, they need a very special tool. A surgeon has a scalpel, a Swiss soldier, a Swiss army knife, a barber, a straight edge razor. So to decide which tool is the most effective and successful interface, we need to understand 3 things: the people, their needs for the task on hand, and the context in which they need it. So it's essential to have the right tool at the right moment. Or, like Crocodile D would say, that's not a knife. Okay, so coming back to Craigslist, and let's apply what we've just learned and play pretend for a moment. Try to picture in your mind who the intended audience of Craigslist is. Try to picture the situation or context in which these people go about selling and buying things. Did something like this come to mind? Remember, Craigslist is a virtual garage sale, a yard sale, a flea market. People that come to the site love digging through stuff. They don't expect to find a brand new shiny leather couch for a few bucks. The experience of Craigslist matches this expectation, and that's why the interface was designed that way. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's very easy to project our own behaviors and reactions onto other users. That's actually called this false consensus effect, which also means just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's bad design. Remember, you are not the user. Okay, well, let's talk about a process for a little bit. In this section, I want to highlight some methods that you can add to your tool belt, which will help you creating better designs. But first off, I show you some examples, and once again, think about it, whether they are good designs or not. So this is an enterprise application that we built for Guy Carpenter. Here's the business builder for the US Census. Here's an operational dashboard for Anbani in the Emirates of Abu Dhabi. And here is Esri's GeoPlanner for ArcGIS. Are those examples of good designs? The answer is yes. They are absolutely great, outstanding, amazing examples. Why? Well, because we did them. No, all jokes aside, asking whether these screenshots are good designs is like asking who is the sexiest person alive. I mean, we really don't know. It's highly subjective. The best way to become more objective is to follow a process that spans your complete project management cycle. The first step is always to conduct research. We typically ask our clients to explain us their business needs, and typically that happens through a walkthrough. We get together with them and they show us what they need, what they want to get out of it. And then we go off and we do interviews. We interview end users or sometimes run a short survey. Those outputs from this research, they feed directly into the analysis, like personas, which are archetypical representations of the end users, and they describe the end users' goals, motivations, and pain points. We then use those personas to guide our design decisions during the design phase. For example, we ask, how would Laritza Spinelli do this? Or does Bob really need this to print his page? So that's really helpful. Then later on, and whenever possible, we try to validate our designs through a method called usability testing, which really helps us to observe real users performing real tasks, which is really different to asking people for their opinions through, for example, a holistic testing. The best example I can give you is the phrase, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. It's like when you ask somebody, how was your trip to Vegas, right? They tell you one thing, but if you were actually with them, observing what they actually did is probably a different story. So obviously, I understand every project and every team is different, and sometimes there's simply not enough time or budget for doing all those things. But at a minimum, I want you to always think in who is this for and why do they need it? You cannot ask enough why questions. There's actually one more thing. And we try to skip wireframes in multiple occasions. We try to go straight to prototypes or even to front-end coding, but we've always come back to wireframes. And we use a software called Balsamiq, which is really inexpensive. I encourage you to use it. As you can see, we're doing multiple versions of wireframes, typically 2 iterations, a maximum of 3 before we move on, which is actually really great to communicate our design ideas. And it really helps us to identify holes and gaps. And now I will show you and have a look at version 3, how it translates into a high fidelity mockup. It's very similar, and the actual output, our implementation is pretty identical. So having those iterations of wireframes early on will save you a lot of money down the line. Okay, so up until now, we've established that good design stems from investments into user experience. A study by Forrester Research actually states that every $1 invested in UX brings $100 in return. And that's by lowering cost of customer acquisition, lower support costs, increased customer retention, and over increase of market share. So investment into UX literally pays off. Another crucial part to saving money in development costs is by utilizing established patterns or best practices. So what are UI patterns? In short, UI patterns describe solutions to common design problems, and they're defined as problem, context, and solution. Now you say, okay, Mike, that all sounds fancy, but what does that even mean? Okay, I'm glad you asked. Let me show you. Let's say you have a map like this, where you connect the depot location, that's this little red star here in the middle of the map, with all its suppliers through straight lines. As you can see, it starts getting crowded really soon. So you start brainstorming, you try to find solutions, and finally somebody says, hey, there's actually a pattern out there called a flow map, and it describes how to solve this issue by using Bezier curves. And guess what? Jacob Wasilkowski and Sarah Bell, they have put together a repository that already implements this solution. Amazing, we can just go out and use that. So here's a screenshot of the actual site showing all the patterns that currently exist. I will show you next the empty state and the task-oriented pattern from the general UX section. Then I will talk a little bit about layouts, layout patterns. I know that many developers struggle about which layout to use and as a starting point. And then later I will show you an example where we did use many of the other patterns. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go too much into details of these patterns. I could probably talk for hours. Okay, so empty state. What is the empty state? Let's look at this example real quick. This is a store locator, which, as a matter of fact, store locator by itself is a pattern. It's so common that it's described as a UI pattern. But in this particular example, when you look at this example, it really looks good. There's nothing wrong. Everything seems to be okay. But only when you think about how the experience for a user will be when they first arrive at the site, you start realizing some of the flaws. So, for example, the search results list is empty. I haven't searched anything yet, right? And the filter is kind of meaningless for the same reason. So in order to fix this, we simply remove those elements and then we move the search into this space below. So when you think about it, after condensing this interface, we actually want some space, and we can use that space to add a tagline. Potentially, we can add some coupons or offers or what have you. So that's actually another really interesting observation. The map, which uses the majority of our canvas, has an empty state as well, and is really not useful at this point either. So how can we solve this? Let's change the map. And you can see, just a simple change in cartography helps us to highlight the states that do have stores. And that's not only more informative, but it also invites the user to click on a map instead of only typing a location. So that's how we can solve the empty state in an application and on the map. Another really important UI patterns is task-oriented. Let's take a look at this example from Bay County. It's called Bay County Interactive Map. It's a legacy app built with Flags. As you can see, all the tools are scattered all over the place, and there's no particular order or visual hierarchy to it. This is known as the Swiss Army knife approach, or sometimes also referred to as kitchen sink. I call it the Mr. Potato Head, where all the features are randomly stacked together. So how can we solve this? When you think about it, the main purpose of this application is that users are interested in a specific address and need to see information related to this information or this location. So knowing that people are already very familiar with searching, it only felt natural to use this as the entry point for our task-oriented interface. And so what we did is we actually used the unified search pattern to let users dive into this workflow. So as I start typing something like beach, I get a list of groups, which behind the scenes is actually multiple calls against multiple services. And you can see beach resulted in results for parcels, addresses, roads, libraries, schools. Maybe there's a school that is on Beach Street. That's why. Because I'm interested in addresses, I select addresses, and I now dive into a list of all the addresses. If I wanted to, I could back up and click on this little back arrow and go up in this hierarchy. But because I do see my address 619 Palm Beach Drive, I select it. The map zooms to that location. I have a clear call to action, which is called Analyze Surrounding Areas. I click on this button. The application does its magic, and it shows me the information that I'm interested in. Because I've chosen an address, it shows me address-related information. If I had to select a school, maybe it would show different information. Let's expand this search radius to 3 miles, and I have like a little dashboard to see some quick stats and then more detailed information. And I'm pretty much done. I can now print or export the data, and that's task-centric. All right, let's look at some of the layouts. And the first layout type is a full map layout. And that's essentially what I just showed you in the previous application. The map is the core focus, and all the tools are on top of the map. Another layout type is what we call a partial map layout. And here the map and the content are side by side and are equally important. And the added benefit of this is that the content, which is typically in a side panel, can hold additional workflows and sometimes even tools, which we found in usability studies to be very effective. Users that work through those workflows sometimes don't even realize that there's a map next to, even though it's really large. That's how effective those workflows are. And this is the layout that we use most often. Another layout type is a reference map layout. The map here is really only for reference purposes. It has limited interactions, and typically it's auxiliary to the content. Finally, there's a no map layout. And you're probably surprised why I say there's a no map layout and say, hey, Mike, I mean, you work for Esri, come on, you have to have a map on this page, right? But actually that's not true. You don't need a map. And actually, just because you don't have a map doesn't mean that you're not using the full power of GIS technology. As a matter of fact, we've used Reviewer Server to produce those numbers that you see on the screen. And just because you don't have a map doesn't mean that you're stuck with this. I mean, there's here on this particular layout, there's actually 2 links that allow you to toggle to a different layout type that actually does have a map. It's just not upfront, because it wasn't important for the user at this point. And talking about toggling between layouts, here's another example, this time from the Hawaii Department of Education. And here we toggle between a full map and a reference map. Right now we're looking at the full map. I click on a school down here, I get an info pop-up. And when I click on show details in this info pop-up, I have a modal window that comes up with details about this particular school. And as you can see in the top right corner of this modal window, I do have a reference map that shows me the exact location and its surroundings of the school. There's actually one more thing I'd like to mention on mobile layouts. There is no partial map on mobile. And you can imagine having a list, and in between the list items, you have a map. And you probably notice, as you scroll down, you actually start touching the map, but instead of continue scrolling, you start panning the map instead, and it's really annoying. We call it this slippery effect. So that's why partial maps just don't really work that well. The solution here is to toggle between a reference map and a full map, and I show you a little video sequence to illustrate this. You can see you have a list of items here, and if the user selects one item for the list, you go to the item details, And here you have a reference map, and it's not an active map. But when you click or tap on this map, the application toggles to a full map, which is now live, and the user can fully interact with it. And that's how you should approach mobile designs. So in summary, it's really important to know the pros and cons of each layout. And like I mentioned, the partial map layout is what we use in most cases for our enterprise application designs. And it's mostly because we have those tools right in the workflows. Okay, here I have another fun design exercise for you. Okay, my first question is always, do you see anything wrong with this site? Or what's the first thing that comes to mind? It's busy, right? So in order to answer this question, typically I ask questions like, who is using this? Who's the user? What do they want to do? What are their goals? Are they able to accomplish their tasks? Are they happy? Did we meet the business needs? And was it successful? So obviously, right now, we don't have this ability to ask all those questions, but even without knowing the answers to those questions, we can see that there's obviously a couple of things wrong. So for example, we have a logo in the top left corner in a prime real estate that is really overboarding and probably too big. We have lots of text that is well meant, but we know that people don't read on a web, so most likely that's wasted space too. We have a base map gallery that I would never ever show on an application. There's very small amount of use cases where base map gallery is really useful, but as a rule of thumb, if you as the author of the map don't know what the best base map for your operational data is, then your users will not. So don't give them those options. It's okay to have a base map toggle where you toggle between like streets and satellite, but that's about it. What else is wrong? We have a couple of searches. Why do we have multiple searches? I don't know. And the map, look at the map. And that's actually one of the pain points that the client told us too. They told us there's too much information on a map. They called it a fire hose of data. I personally actually call it a tsunami of data. I mean, who came up with this idea of putting all those dots on a map? Unbelievable. And then, yeah, I mean, we have this layer list on the left-hand side. It looks like ArcMap on the web. So my question is, why would anybody ever be able to know how to use this app? Because we're smart. Yes, we're all smart, but we can do better. So what did we do? First, we addressed some of the most obvious issues. We removed the logo and we removed the base map gallery. We also tried to remove the text, but the client was adamant on keeping some of it, so we left it in there. And then we used UI patterns to address many of those issues. So as I mentioned, those patterns like a corporate map, you can actually go to the pattern site at mapuipatterns.com and you can look them up. So for example, this corporate map is really good to deal with the fact that there's too much data on the map. So what it does is it accumulates the data up to a certain geography, which in our case are states. And only after clicking on the state, we dive into the details and we start showing those dots. We also implement a unified search, which combines the multiple searches, the search and the locator. We added a locate me button that allows users to conveniently show the area of interest. We also try to implement the task-oriented UI pattern, which gives our target audience a clear call to action. We do use browse geographies, which is an alternative means to get to the data or the area of interest. And an alternative to that, a feature selection, which allows users to use a freehand tool to just circle in the area of interest, which then zooms to that. So instead of focusing on geographies, this is really only what you're interested in. We do have a home button to allow users to reset the application in case they get lost. And then we have place marks, which represents states and territories that are maybe on the other side of the planet, and we don't want to show the whole world as the default extent. Okay, so great. Was it successful? Well, we did actually usability testing, and we found out that there's some room for improvement. And The first thing we did is we improved the look. We lightened up the background. Like as you can see, only the primary buttons are now blue. All the others, especially on the map, they blend into the background, and in that way we were able to remove clutter. And then we removed the intro text. Finally, we found out through observation that nobody was reading, which we already knew, but hey. Secondly, we found out that the legend needed to be visible. It cannot be hidden behind a button, like on the left-hand side, which is really crucial for people to make sense out of the map. And the same applies to the layer list, and which we combined with the dashboard. Okay, great. So I just showed you a couple of UI patterns. And like I said, I wish I had more time to show you more of the problems that patterns do solve. A really common problem is having too much data on a map. A filter can really be useful for those cases, and how to interact between the app and the map. And there we have patterns like the marker list and details, extent-driven context, and store locator. And I encourage you to check those out. Okay, Mike, you say, that's great. You told us everything we needed to know about UX, your design process, or you showed us all those really cool UI patterns. But what about the visual design, the look and feel, the aesthetics of the page? Well, my short answer is we can make anything look good. That's not a question. But what is most important is that it's useful and that it works well. If it's not useful, you don't need to worry about the looks anymore, right? It's like a relationship. It's about the inner values, right? It's not about the looks, right? That's what they say. Okay, anyways, in case you're interested to learn more about the principles of visual design, I posted a link here to the foundations that includes content about alignment, visual hierarchy, consistency, white space, all the good stuff. Something that Al has put together in his design lab. And actually talking about Al, Al, are you still on the line? I hope he's still there. Are you ready to show us your ArcGIS vector tile style editor?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. Thanks a lot. Alrighty. Okay, thanks, Michael. Right, so we're going to jump right in. So we wanted to show sort of a real world scenario of sort of design iteration and implementation. So we're going to take a look at the style editor here. So basically about 3 to 5 years ago, there was a pretty big requirement from the community to be able to style base maps or vector tile base maps. And so immediately what happened as soon as they were published, we came out with sort of this hard and fast approach to styling. And we published a blog, and in 13 short steps, anybody who was an ArcGIS user could go and copy one of the items locally, download the JSON, manipulate the JSON locally, upload it, and then add it to the map viewer, and then make that a base map. So we could get you going if you were an ArcGIS user and fairly familiar with the platform. But the reality is that there were more people that wanted to perform styling more than just hardcore ArcGIS users. So our good friend Renee came along and said, well, I can build an editor and make it a little bit easier, so I don't need to go through this upload download process. So something that isn't quite apparent to a lot of people when you style, and this comes to back to the problem scenario we're trying to solve, is when you try to style a vector tile layer, you actually need to copy the item first. So, and that's the unfortunate part of this application, is you actually need to go out to your account, create the item copy first, and then you can come to the application, sign in, and you will see your layer in here. It gives you an option to pick it. So we kind of have a 50-50 split design, and it's obviously the focus is on working on the JSON. And that's one of the complexities with respect to working with these tile layers, is that they're very detailed. There's thousands of layers potentially in each one. So it can be overwhelming. If you're not a developer and you don't understand JSON, it could be unusable at that point. So for some users. So there was a search tool in here too that kind of helped us out to find things, and we could replace the hex values and then apply the style. So again, this is a very common kind of pattern when apps evolve. Sometimes they just evolve as an idea, and there's kind of a hard and fast way, and then they grow into better things. So then the prototype lab said, well, we think we can take a shot at this, and we think we understand the users and what they need to do. So they made it easier to copy base maps, which was really the starting point, right? You need to copy one of the existing base maps, and then you give it a name, and then you're ready to start working with it. The part that I really liked is what they did with the search mechanism in here. So they gave you the ability to type in just any sort of context, and it would filter out all of the potentially thousands of layers that had that word in it. So there's a lot of water and a lot of land layers. So the problem is actually very, very complicated. This is not a simple application to build just because of the complexity of the specification and how many layers you're working with. So this is good. We can look at the visibility of layers, the symbology, the hex values were here. There was still not a tight integration into what you were styling and what you were actually seeing. And you can see the map was minimized in this case. So the visualization part was minimized and the layers were emphasized, which may not be exactly what a user wants to see. And the other part that they added was this tool that showed all of the JSONs. So basically, to me, that's when the design starts to fail. That's when you throw up your hands and say, I'm just going to give you the specification because the application can't do it, or it doesn't know exactly what you want to do. So we took a look at this as part of the developer experience team and said, all right, well, what are people really trying to do it, and who are those people? So again, just going through what Mike was talking about, but just sort of the research and the analysis basically said to us that there were two user groups where there's just designers, work for companies like Nike as an example, and they had 3 hex values and they wanted to style an entire map just in a matter of minutes. And then there was developers who might want to do the same thing, maybe want to do things at a little deeper level to match their application. And then, yeah, basically that was it. And then you have cartographers that are in there too. And the cartographers are really designers. So they all wanted to accomplish the same thing, and that was to be able to style a map quickly and effectively. And so that's what we took. And we looked at the other applications that were developed before. And again, the other thing too that's a little different is we actually did some research, and Michael participated in this, and so did all the cartographers at Esri. And we asked them what they wanted to do and what they wanted to accomplish. So we really had some hands-on ideas from real people, but we knew we wanted to hide the spec. We didn't want to lead with that, or even show it if we could. Mask the complexity of thousands of layers that are in some of these base maps. Make it fast and easy. Give power users power tools who wanted it. And we wanted to do this in 3 steps. I mean, it's kind of the magic thing, right? If you could build an application that does something in 3 steps, it's like the 1, 2, 3 to get it done is always a good selling point. So I'm just going to the dashboard here on ArcGIS for a developer website, and we can start styling a map. And I'll just kind of step through the application and use it, and we'll talk through some of the patterns and the things that Michael was talking about. So here we're looking at the empty state. So basically, when the application starts, step 1 is you need to pick a layer, because you can't start styling from nothing. And we didn't want to explain that and have anything extravagant there. So basically, we force the user, and we give them categories. They can look at different categories. They can look at their own styles that are available. But really, they need to pick something to get started. So we're going to select a style, and we're going to start editing. So that's step 1. So step 1 is done, and we don't require you to have an account. We don't require any of that stuff yet until it's time to actually save it. Okay, so once this loads, then we'll go through and start the styling process. All right. There we go. Okay, so when the application loads, here's what happens. So first of all, this quick editor tool pops up. And so what we've done is we've grouped the thousands of layers that are available. It doesn't matter which base map you pick, you're going to get these same 6 categories. And we allow you to style like the entire map in just a fell swoop click. So here I'll just pick a color. So this is like a scenario where you just want to start styling visually by looking at things. And this is going to style all of the land layers, which there could be, again, hundreds of. The other option is if you're a designer and you're coming to this tool, then you can just drop in a hex value that might be one of the colors that you're interested in. So yeah, so I'll just pick a couple different hex values that I have here, put them in. Let's grab for nature too as well. And here's what's interesting. So you have different views. So you have the main view. So the focus is on the visual design of the map. And that's what the application was designed to do. So we recognize there's lots of layers. We recognize there's tons of things that you can style and touch and manipulate. I mean, everything is touchable and stylable, as you'll see. But we wanted to create a strong visualization of the map. And then we give you these mini maps down here too. So in some of these mini maps, they emphasize the color of nature more, so you can see the green coming out. So it's good because it gives you perspective around the world. So that's how we solve that instead of forcing you to go and inspect different parts of the world manually to see if your map looks nice everywhere. So if we want, we can go and change the style. If you just take a look at Sydney down here on the right-hand side, we can start picking different font sets. So there's basically every font set that you can imagine in here. So we'll just leave it with italic because that was a requirement. That was one of the top requirements. So everything you see here evolved from the interviews with people like, what do you want to do? Well, I want to touch the land, the water, the roads, boundaries, and these other things. And then fonts was next. And then people want to change the size of the labels. So we're actually iterating through using different algorithms to make all of the labels and all of the layers for all of the features scalable at a certain level. And then we can control the road width. So if we go down the list here, what's interesting is we can undo anything. So this is just undoing our different sizes or sizing the labels, or we can actually reset the entire style. So if you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? Well, you can actually undo that as well and go back to your last set of styles. So again, only a few tools in this toolbar, but they're very critical and part of natural workflows. When you're styling, it's a very iterative process. Okay, now let's say you're a little bit more of a super user or you want to build a map for a particular area, because we get this a lot. I don't want to build, a styled map for the world just for this particular park or parks in general. So what I've done here is I've actually clicked on the map. So when I click on the map, it jumps us to the next tool, which is basically this tree view, where we can search for layers and it'll find and filter them out. So we can do that search context there, or we can just touch the map and it will open up the layer for us. So we've discovered this is admin Forest Park. And again, we don't know the JSON spec. We're not worried about it. It's not part of our workflow. We just know that we've found the thing that we want to touch and manipulate. So we can change the visibility if we want. We can make that layer available at a much wider zoom range. So for example, zoom range up to zoom range 4, and then when we hit 3, you'll see it disappears. So this is all part of styling vector tile layers, is you have to control the visibility because it only makes sense for them to be visible at certain ranges. And there's really cool things that you can do too. Is you remember class break renders? So you could go in here and you could actually change the color at different zoom levels. So let me done that and let me add some transparency. So here, when we hit zoom level 6, we're going to have a certain color. And then when we go to like 7, then it's going to flip to the other color. So this is a really, really interesting way to style. And this is what people wanted to do. Then the other thing is, let's just go back to the park. Let's show how we dealt with labels. So again, you can click on labels. When you touch a label, it shows you where it is in this hierarchy. Now, here's an interesting thing. You can actually grab all of the features in the parent for all the layers underneath. and we'll give you the minimum set of properties that match everything. So there's sort of a lot of complexity here, but we could go through and style everything in one fell swoop. So this, again, is more of your power user or your cartographer who wants to get in and make some manipulations. So next tool that we offer is some people want, as through interviews, again, we discovered some people want to just style different colors. Like they want to take all the blues. So we'll grab all of the blues for all of the layers, and they want to make them a different blue. So in this case, this is water, obviously. So we can done that and apply. So that's one sort of scenario. Another scenario is like, okay, I did that for everything, but I could either pick something here or I could click on the ocean and say, I actually want the marine area to be slightly lighter. So I'll make that a different blue. So now there's a distinction between lakes and water. So again, I don't know anything about these layers, anything about the specification, but I have these different modes of searching because this was the requirement from the community. They asked to be able to do this in different ways. Okay, again, for the superpower users, we give you the ability to get in and change highway shields and upload your own bitmaps and so forth, so you can really super customize these things. The last thing I wanted to show you is this ability to randomize. So let's say you just don't have any idea whatsoever. We built this functionality. It's kind of a fun thing to do, but it actually is very meaningful because you can use different color algorithms. So you could use analogous if you wanted to and go through and randomize, and you can find like a nice color set that you like. So, okay, we'll leave it at here. We'll leave it at this one. So this is step 2. So step 1 was picking the layer. Step 2 is this process of styling, which is an iterative process. It's very visual. You have the map, you have the tree, you have these different search tools, but hopefully the UI is not overwhelming and users can find things quickly. Okay, so the last part here is I'm actually just going to save this out. And this is sort of an aqua color. And I'm going to publish to everyone. And since most of us are probably developers on the line here, what we'll do is let me go out and give this just a second. And I'm going to go back to ArcGIS for developers. And if you're not aware, we've got these cool tutorials. So I'll pick on JavaScript and styling and visualization. And you can learn how to style the map just like I did by following these tutorials. But in this case, all I want to do is just go through here. So this is the ID I'm grabbing from the top URL for what we've just created. And I can dump this here, make a portal item out of it, run this little application, and this is going to load our styled map. And again, as we zoom in, it would adhere and conform to all of the styling that we put together. So in summary, let's see. Oh yeah, let's just talk about the visual design a little bit before we're done. So the idea is we expect the user, and naturally if you do research on usability and how humans interact with applications that tend to move from the top left, or we've been taught to move from the top left to the bottom right. So the application works in that manner. So we have a simplified toolbar. We have panels that are available when you select tools. We have the map that's optionally clickable, again, depending on the kind of user you are. If you're a cartographer, you might go straight for this. Then we have the mini maps to save you the time and the effort from moving around the world. And then you can actually add, hill shade, or you can change the base map down here in the bottom right. So there's functionality as you move through everything. Okay, so was it successful? Well, I guess there's a few other things too. We did follow a design process for this. We did interviews. We did a bunch of wireframes. We looked at, we researched everything out there to make sure we had everything at our fingertips. And we were very iterative, working with the different teams and with Michael and the cartography team at Esri, and asking people, came up with the personas and yeah, so that was all key. But we did have some enhancement requests. The biggest one was, when will it be in ArcGIS Enterprise? And we were working on that as we speak right now. For performance, we made a bunch of performance enhancements, and we also added a feedback button so people could give us direct feedback just instantly from the application down the lower left. So that was kind of neat. So was it successful? Well, obviously, like Michael was saying, were the users happy? And from the studies and from the feedback we got, we're seeing that it was successful. But give it a try yourself. So give it a test drive. Go to developersarcgis.com, work through the tutorials, and just take a look at some of the design patterns there, because I think they build on what Michael showed us earlier. So I think that's all I have that I wanted to show you guys. So I think without further ado, we'll hand it back to Michael and take some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Al. I see that we still have 10 minutes left, and there's still time for you to submit questions. So feel free to use the little chat window to submit your questions so we can answer them. But Al, I think it's amazing what you did. I mean, all the work is just outstanding for many reasons, actually. I mean, first of all, because you removed the burden from the user and you moved it to the system. Like you said, there's so many layers, hundreds of layers that the user has to deal with, but you made it appear very easy to use. And that's the true magic, I think, that you applied here. I mean, you're like a magician, right? You're making this trick look seamlessly easy. And obviously, you have to invest lots in the back end and all the work you've done to make it happen. But that's what makes a great user experience. So I think that's great. The other thing is, when you think about it, application design is difficult by itself, regular applications. But in our case, we also have to deal with maps. So it's a map application. So it's even more difficult. And in our case, when we're concerned with styling, we spend lots of effort into making this application behave well, but also look good, right? Only to find that a map that typically uses a majority of the screen real estate doesn't match the look of our application, right? So, but with your tool, this is not a problem anymore. We can actually make the map look exactly like the application or our corporate branding, right? Follow our style guides. So that's great too. And here on this slide, you see a couple of links, just all the things that we talked about today. I did add one more that I have not mentioned. It's CalSet React. It's a component library based on React framework, and it follows our CalSite design library that we have here at Esri. So it looks like Esri styling, but that's out there for you to consume or look at or get inspired. So I wanted to add that too. And with that, I go back to Amy for questions.
All right, thank you, Michael. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. We've received a few, so we're going to go through those. And as a reminder, feel free to continue submitting questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. Our first question is, when testing in the ArcGIS.com map viewer, how do you know what zoom level you're at? The zoom level numbers are not visible.
Yeah, so that's something I can answer. Yeah, so we don't have that functionality available in the application itself. It's a little frustrating. I think what I tend to do is I use the application template that I built called Map Styler. So if you're in the map viewer, if you're in the map viewer and you just save your application out as an application template, pick Styler. And in Styler, I have a little tool at the bottom that shows the zoom levels. So it's not inside of the map viewer, but it's a quick little diversion so you can understand the zoom levels and then come back. So the other way to do it is to go to the vector tile style editor and do it in there, which of course is not inside of the map viewer. So this iteration of the map viewer doesn't have it. So you have to jump out to one of those two applications. So either Map Styler or the vector tile style editor.
All right, thanks, Hal. The second question, what is the name of the application used to create a mock-up app?
Yeah, so I can take this one. I showed you Balsamic, which we used to create the wireframes. And then after creating the wireframes, we moved to high fidelity mockups. And there's a couple of tools out there. There's obviously the Adobe suite of tools like Photoshop, Illustrator, but we also use Adobe XD, which is experience design, to create prototypes. So we stitch together those high fidelity mockups to make the appearance of a working application, but it's obviously only fake. I know that some people, they like Figma, which is out there at figma.com to create high fidelity mockups. And so those are like the tools that we typically use. And the next step after mockups would be to do development. And that's typically then the actual front-end development that goes into HTML, CSS, and using JavaScript libraries or component frameworks like Calc React to get started quickly.
All right, thanks, Michael. In your experience, how many graphic designers work on customizing the base maps for their organization using this tool?
Okay, so I assume that's the vector tile style editor using that tool. So, it really depends. I would say in most cases, graphic designers aren't really working with the vector tile style editor, not up front. Most of the time, the developer is tasked with building the application. That's just the reality of the situation. Because that's the standard pattern, then I think the usage leans that way a lot. And then, yeah, graphic designers would maybe be brought in later on in some cases, but I think that's probably the 70-75% kind of rule. And yeah, and I think you could have as many graphic designers as you want, customizing a base map, but it obviously would have to be a collaborative effort. And generally what happens is, and Mike can talk to this too, is at the beginning of a project, you come up with like the design palette, like what are the brand colors that we're going to follow. And so the application design and styling of the base maps are really, really closely coupled, and they should all be part of the branding color decisions that are made up front. And again, how many designers are sitting in the room at that time depends on how big the project is, how big the organization is, and so forth. So that's probably the best explanation I can give there.
All right, thanks, Al. How do you move from gathering user requirements to building wireframes interfaces?
Yeah, so I want to make a distinction here between user requirements and business requirements. So our clients, they typically know everything about the business and the business requirements. They're really concerned with the outputs of what they want to get out of this application, right? And those business requirements are mostly very different to the end user needs. So as an end user, I don't care about the outputs. I just want to get my job done, right? So the end user, call it requirements, is something that we research and that informs the interface besides knowing about the business requirements. So in product development, what we do is we create what we call a spike, which is like an extra iteration for research. And then throughout this iteration, we create wireframes, and then we iterate those wireframes internally with stakeholders. And then this will create new items in our backlog, new PBIs. And in projects, that's typically something that we do upfront and call it iteration 0 if you want. And then for the holistic design, and then we go into the individual iterations and we do design throughout all the iterations, but that's for very specific sections.
All right, thanks, Michael. And for our last question, does the vector tile style editor tool create a new set of vector tiles for the custom base map?
Okay, no, it doesn't create new vector tiles. It only saves the JSON that represents the styles that will be applied to the tiles inside of the web browser or inside of whatever client is rendering. So the answer there is no.
All All right. Well, thank you, Michael and Alan, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Improving Your Web App Through UI UX Best Practices. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact me using my email address in your follow-up email. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would greatly appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. We will be providing a recording of this presentation, which will be available within 7 to 10 business days on the go.esri.com/geodev page. And on behalf of Esri and our presenters, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.